Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentour and another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, how big can the jet engines actually become? Why do they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger? And what does the future look like? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, put on right.
Clear to land 31 right. Delta 260, reduce.
This video is brought to you together with Skillshare. Now, there's never been a better time than right now to kind of indulge in your own curiosity and to try to find a new skill, maybe even looking into a new career. Skillshare is an excellent tool to do exactly that. They have thousands of high-quality video courses in pretty much anything you can imagine. Anything from starting your own YouTube channel, how to do that, to how to use Final Cut Pro 10 in the best way to improve on the quality of the content of that channel. Now, using Skillshare is really economical. It's less than 10 euros per month. But for those of you, the 1,000 first ones who uses this link here below in the description of the video, you'll get 2 months of premium Skillshare absolutely for free so that you can find whatever course that suits you best. So check it out. All right. So in this video, guys, we're going to be talking about jet engines, but there's also going to be a little bit of talk about aerodynamics, and you need to understand that. So I talked about a lot of the principles that we'll be covering today in my video that I did last week. So if you haven't checked it out, it's a video about how everything you thought you knew about winglets is actually wrong, then check that out either after this video or you can go and check it out right now to understand as much as possible. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look into how jet engines works in the first place. So back during the 40s and 50s, jet engines was being made. And basically the fundamental kind of principle behind how a jet engine works is Newton's third law of physics. So that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the way that the early jet engines worked was they pulled air in from the front using, in the very early ones, a radial compressor and then subsequently serial compressor stages to compress the air down, then entering it into a burn chamber. In the burn chamber they would add fuel, light that on fire. That would increase the temperature dramatically, which would increase the pressure. That would transform into airspeed, as in the air would be pushed out toward the back through the turbine stages. Now, the turbine stages would take some of that pressure off and use that energy to turn the compressor, and then it was expelled through the nozzle at the back. And the way that this high speed air was now pushed out through the back of the nozzle, that was what created the thrust. And they very early realized that you can create a lot of thrust like this. Okay, basically increasing the speed of the air as much as possible. The more you can increase it, the more thrust you get. But they also understood fairly early that there is a limit to how much thrust you can get out this way. Right? You can continue to add more and more fuel, thereby increasing the pressure difference, increasing the temperature. But at some point you'll have problems with the internal components not being able to take that high temperature. So they started looking into, is there a different way? Is there a different way to make these engines more efficient? And what they realized when they looked at Newton's third law of physics is that either you can take a little bit of air and accelerating it a lot, or you can take a lot of air and accelerating it a little bit. All right? The amount of thrust will essentially be the same. And this is the idea behind the new turbofan engines that you see. So if you use the energy from the air going out the core, you take some of that energy through the turbine stages, and that turbine stages will actually drive a big propeller, which is essentially what the fan is in the front. Well, then all of a sudden you'll be able to suck in an enormous volume of air and accelerating it a little bit, not closely as fast as you do with the core engine, but what we call the secondary flow, the bypass flow, will still produce a lot of thrust. In fact, on modern engines, that bypass flow is actually giving up to 80% of the total thrust. So this is why you see the jet engines essentially getting bigger and bigger, because the bigger bypass flow that you can use, the more thrust you can get and the more effective the engine becomes. You can clearly see how this is happening through the developing of the 737. So the Boeing 737 on the 100 and the 200, the first ones that came in the 60s, they had a Pratt & Whitney JT8 Delta engine on it, which is essentially a turbojet engine with a little bit of bypass ratio. So they had a little fan in the front, but the bypass ratio was only on the early ones about 1.07. So this means that the amount of air flowing past the core of the engine and through the core of the engine was about the same. So the bypass ratio was about 1 to 1. But then in the later iterations of the Boeing 737, the classic and then the next generation, they started using the CFM 56-7 Bravo engine. So this has a much higher bypass ratio and a much bigger fan. You can clearly see it. The bypass ratio of the CFM 56 is about 5.5 to 1. So it's 5.5 times the volume of air going past the core than it is flowing through the core. Now this started to produce a little bit of design problems of the 737, which I've mentioned in another video about why the 737 jet engines are flat at the bottom. Check it out if you haven't already, but it was still manageable. Now, in the latest iteration of the Boeing 737, the 737 MAX, the bypass ratio is even bigger. So the CFM LEAP 1 Bravo engines that are on the MAX, this bypass ratio is close to 10 to 1, all right? Which means that the engine size is much bigger. So this is why the Boeing 737 MAX had to move its engines forward and up a little bit to get the ground clearance, but this is also why they had to employ some really smart engineering to actually extend the landing gear a bit. So if you look at the MAX extending and retracting the landing gear, you'll see that there are some linkages that are working to actually give a little bit more ground clearance to the aircraft. It's a very, very smart design. Anyway, another example of this is the evolution of the Boeing 777. So when the Boeing 777 came about, both Airbus and Boeing had realized that it's much bigger to have 2 huge jet engines than it is to have 4 engines, because the maintenance cost and just the cost of buying the engines is so much lower. So if you can produce the thrust needed through 2 engines rather than 4, that is much better. And this is what we're seeing on the Boeing 777. The Boeing 777 has been a huge success. All right, it's been an effective workhorse for Boeing and for all of the airlines that have been using it. But of course, you cannot stop competing. You need to improve on that. And this is where the Boeing 777X comes in. So on the original Boeing 777, you had, at that time, the world's biggest jet engines, the General Electric 90. Now, these were extremely big. All right, powerful beasts. They were creating 510 kilonewtons of thrust, and they have a bypass ratio of about 9 to 1. All right, but Boeing thought, together with General Electric, that if we are going to improve on the 777, we are going to need to be able to take more payload, and we want to do that using engines that uses less fuel. And the only way to do that is increase the efficiency. So what they've done is they've actually made an even bigger engine, the General Electric 9X, which was just certified by the FAA, I think 2 weeks ago. Now, this is an absolute beast. The fan is 3.4 meter wide, and the total width of the pylon of the engine is 4.7 meters. So this is an enormous engine, but in fact, it's actually producing a little bit less thrust than the General Electric 90. So while the General Electric 90 was giving 510 kilonewtons of thrust, the General Electric 9X is only giving 490. And that is with a much higher fuel efficiency. And the reason that they can actually take off with more weight, with less engine power, is because of the increase in wingspan, which is what I talked about in last week's video. So So what will happen then? Can we actually make the engines more efficient than what they are right now? And the answer to that is yes. The 777's new engines, the General Electric 9X, is a great example of that. So not only have they increased the size of it, thus increasing the bypass ratio, they've also worked on the internal components. And here's where you can still do a little bit of magic. So, for example, they have increased the pressure ratio from about 40:1 to 60:1 inside of the General Electric 9X. And they've done so using more compressor stages, compressing the air even further. They've changed the way that the burn chambers work, and they're working with some 3D printed components that just wasn't possible to manufacture before. They're also using some fantastic new materials called ceramic composite matrix materials, which is basically ceramics inside of the hottest part of the engine. And because these components are both stronger, lighter, and that they can take more heat, they have actually managed to increase this pressure ratio quite a bit, and that improves on the overall efficiency of the engine. They've also done other things, like they have decreased the number of fan blades in the front from 22 on the original engine to I think 16 on the General Electric 9X, which also helps with the weight. Okay, but now we're getting about to the limit of what we can do with the current materials we have to use. All right, there's not much more that you can do in order to make the internal core of the engine more efficient. So the only thing that you can do from now on is increase the size of the fan. Okay, continue to increase the bypass ratio. So will that happen? Okay, here's where it's becoming quite interesting. Now, what you have to understand about making an aircraft, about aircraft design, is that an aircraft is basically a huge compromise. Right? It's a compromise between thousands of different factors, and all of those factors are working together to give the total performance of the aircraft. So as an example, you can increase the size of the engine. All right, you can increase the size of the fan, but as you increase the size of the engine, it will inevitably become more heavy. Okay, you can use smart materials, you can use composites, you can use carbon composites, you can do all of these things to try to minimize the weight increase. But the fact is, at some point, as you make the engine bigger, it will become more heavy. Okay, now that weight needs to be lifted by the wings. Also, as the engines are hanging below the wings, when they become bigger, you cannot have them scraping the runway. So you need to lift them higher up. And the way to do that is making bigger landing gear. Together, if you make a bigger landing gear and if you have a bigger engine weighing more, the weight will increase more and more. And at some point, the combination of these two factors will basically negate, it will take away the entire effect of the efficiency increase of the engine. So while the engine might be much more efficient, the aircraft is now so heavy that it will have much higher induced drag and it will still burn more fuel. You with me? So this is what I was talking about in last week's video, by the way. So if you have heavier components, you can make the wings wider, you can increase the wingspan and the aspect ratio of the aircraft, and thereby being able to carry this extra weight without a significant increase in induced drag. Perfect, good. But like I said, there is a limit to this, and the fact is that the General Electric 9X is probably very close to the optimum, where we can see right now the optimum is. Well, then some of you will probably have listened to me and you heard that, well, the engines are hanging below the wings, so why don't we just fix that by putting the engines on top of the wings instead? All of a sudden, you won't need a bigger landing gear. In fact, you can probably decrease the size of the landing gear, and that should enable us to make bigger engines and more efficient engines, right? No, is the answer to that. And the reason for that is actually aerodynamics. So in my last episode, I talked about how lift was created and the fact that air flows over the wings and the wing in itself creates a bit of a circulatory pattern, which increases the speed of the air over the wings and it decreases the speed of the air under the wings. All right. And the combination of the downwash and this pressure effect that happens because of this is what creates the lift. Now, the fact is that the aerodynamic principles at the bottom of the wing is much, much simpler than at the top of the wing. So when the air comes towards a wing that has a little bit of an angle to it, the air doesn't have much choice. It has to change direction. It has to go downwards. It cannot go through the wing, right? But the fact is that on top of the wing, that's not really the case, because the air will have to flow over the wing and it will have to follow the profile of the wing into the downwash in order for the wing to be effective. If the air does not do that, it will create what we call a wake behind the wing. It will detach from the overside of the wing, it will go into what we call a turbulent flow, and that wake will decrease the lift of the wing and will increase the amount of drag, and we don't want that to happen. So this means that the aerodynamic properties of the bottom side of the wing and the top side of the wing are different, and they're much more sensitive on the top of the wing. This is why it is so important to make sure that there's no contaminants on top of the wing, all right? That there's no ice on top of the wing, because it is so sensitive. Okay, I'm going to get to what this has to do with the engine, just stand by. When we fly a modern aircraft, we fly close to transonic speeds. Okay, when I fly a 737, we typically cruise at 0.79, Mach 0.79, Mach 0.8. All right, so that's almost 80% of the speed of sound. All right, that's what the aircraft is doing. However, you already heard that the air is accelerated over the top of the wings. So this means that the air that's going over the top of wings is actually going quicker than the aircraft. This will bring the air into the transonic area, where part of the flow is going to be supersonic and part of the flow is going to be transonic. And when you have supersonic flow, it creates a pressure wave. Right? You can actually see it. If you're sitting over the wings and you're looking out on the wings, you can actually sometimes see something that looks like a visual illusion. Right? It's a little bit of a line going over the wing and it's moving. Right? That is that pressure. Right? That is the supersonic pressure wave. And that is part of the design. All right? It was designed to have that. It causes a bit of drag, but it's still manageable and it's still on the economical side. However, if you put something else close to the upper side of the wing, for example an engine and the lip of an engine, that same acceleration of air will happen over the edge of the lip of the engine as well. And now you will have accelerated air not only over the wing but also over the lip, and they will be close to each other. So the effect of that speed increase will be compounded. This means that that supersonic pressure wave that will create the new drag will happen at a lower speed. Your critical Mach number, as in when you start to have wave drag that is bad for the aircraft, will come at a lower speed. So if you put a huge engine on top of the wing, you now have aerodynamical effects that will actually negate, that will take away the at least some of the effect of these bigger engines. You with me? Right? So this, together with the fact of it's just being, from a pure engineering point of view, harder to put huge engines on top of the wings, and it's harder to access them in case of maintenance action, makes it unlikely that we will ever see huge jet engines on top of the wings. So in conclusion, will we continue to see ever larger jet engines? My answer to that right now is that yes, you will probably start to see slightly bigger engines than the General Electric 9X. That's a possibility, but not much bigger than the one we see right now, unless there is either a complete change in the way that we build aircraft. That's a possibility. If we start to see, for example, flying wings, there's a possibility to put the engines on top of a flying wing in a different way than what we're doing right now. So a complete change in engineering philosophy could bring about even bigger engines, but my thought is that we will probably not see much bigger engines than the ones we see right now. Okay guys, that's what I had for today. I hope that you enjoyed this, and if you did enjoy it, I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. Alright? Before you go, I also want to give a huge shout out to one of my Patreons called Ronnie. Now, one of the perks that I give to my patrons is that they can book a Skype session with me where we can just hang out and talk about aviation or whatever they want to talk about. Now, it turns out that Ronnie has just started his own YouTube channel about tech and tech reviews called Power Up. And he wanted, a little bit of tips and tricks from me, that I've learned over the years. Of course, I told him about Skillshare and about the fact that you can get these courses, great courses. Once again, you have a link down here if you're interested in that. But generally speaking, we just had a good chat about things, both aviation and how to create YouTube videos. Now, Ronnie's channel is tiny. He just started a month ago. I think he had 34 subscribers when we talked to him. And I would love for you to go over and show him some love and give him some support. And if we can get him over 1,000 subscribers based on this video, that would be amazing. So once again, the channel is called Power Up. I have a link to his channel here in the description of the video. Go over there and show him what this YouTube community is all about. Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentour Aviation app and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.